Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the Simpsons episode, Homer's Phobia. Now, if you normally watch my channel, you know I don't really do TV episode reviews, but because I'm doing a John Waters series and reviewing all the films that John Waters has directed, I wanted to talk about this specific Simpsons episode because it's a big deal for him. It's why a lot of people know John Waters, and I think it just fits in with this series. This isn't kind of a new thing I'm doing. This is just a special case scenario. But this is a kind of a big episode for The Simpsons. It won a Outstanding Animation Program Emmy. It won an Outstanding TV Individual Episode Award from GLAAD, and it was considered very progressive at the time, although The Simpsons has won 31 Emmys, so I don't know how special that really was, but it had a much more progressive portrayal, since the only one who really had a problem with John being gay was Homer and Barney and Moe. It had a very progressive, at least at the time, 19 years ago when this episode aired. I don't know if some of the portrayals are as progressive as it was at the time, but I definitely think this episode's heart is in the right place, and there's nothing I would categorize as really offensive. It's very much portraying the gay community in a positive light, even though, you know, sometimes they do the lispy gay voice through the various voice actors. I think mainly the great portrayal by John Waters in this episode really gives this episode a really strong foundation to go on, because you know that there's gay people everywhere. It's a part of life, it's a part of culture, and you should really accept everyone for this rather than force these very rigid ideas of masculinity, which Homer's very threatened by because he thinks Bart is gay and he's threatened by a gay being in his house. It's probably the most negative portrayal of Homer I've probably ever seen in a Simpsons episode. I'm sure someone can mention another one. This is probably the ugliest this character looked. It really put the Simpsons in an interesting territory in that it especially points out the ridiculousness of homophobia, but also showing how even someone you like and have laughed at for up to, 8 seasons at this point could potentially be homophobic as well. The first time I watched it before doing this, I thought maybe some of the portrayals of anyone who's gay in this episode, other than John Waters and Smithers, is a bit too much, particularly the Steelworkers thing. But then as I watched it again, I thought, a lot of what it's doing in this is to show how much of the world is gay and how accepting everyone else is and how irrational a lot of his fears are. After The Simpsons need to sell a Civil War doll to help pay a gas bill because Bart was up to a scheme that's like an opening Simpsons scheme that sets off the episode, and then you kind of forget about that. So it's hard when you're starting episodes or going through syndication sometimes to remember exactly what these shenanigans started, but whatever. Or at least for me, I always felt that way with The Simpsons. Anyway, so then they go to a mall, to a store named Cockamamie's, which is a collectible shop or kind of a thrift store, and it's run by John, voiced by John Waters, who they quickly become friends with after they see how much awesome stuff he has in his shop and talks about camp. Homer thinks that's really cool, and he starts getting along with The Simpsons until after their awesome meeting and John and Homer dance. Homer figures out that John is gay after he suggests to Marge they should have him and his wife over for dinner, and doesn't want to hang out with John because he's gay, and that freaks him out. And then he starts to realize that maybe Bart could be gay and he needs to spend time with him and hopefully make him straight and take him hunting, and hilarity ensues. This was a big deal for John Waters and John Waters' career, that's why I'm reviewing it, but it also kind of shows how good of an actor he can really be. I think this is probably one of his best performances as an actor. This probably goes into more John Waters the celebrity and John Waters the actor rather than the director, and I know a lot of people know him more as an actor than a director, and some people are fans of his who don't really watch his movies, which semi upsets me. But I really always liked his portrayal in this because it's very much John Waters. Like, he's playing a part in a guy named John, but it sounds like all the interviews I've seen with John Waters. I really loved it when this episode aired that he was going to be on The Simpsons. It was a big deal in Baltimore. It's really the only time I've seen him do anything about his homosexuality. I think a lot of his movies kind of hint at that, but not as straightforward as the Simpsons episode did. And he really does an amazing job in this episode. It's probably one of the better Simpsons guest appearances, particularly in this season. Some people have ranked it rather high. I personally really love it. Obviously, I'm a little biased, but I think he does a really great job. I kind of wish, because he hangs out with the Simpsons so much, they never really explain why they kind of just had this flirtation with this guy and then you never see him again. Maybe you do, like in the background, but I couldn't find him being listed voicing any other episodes. I know he talked about in interviews he tried to develop a show with this character, maybe like a spin-off or a different show with him as a voice actor. I know he's been on Clarence, and he was in a Mickey Mouse cartoon recently, and he has done some voice acting, and he did a really good performance in this episode, and I think he really makes this episode. If you had a Simpsons voice actor playing a gay character other than Waylon Smithers, of course, it wouldn't have worked as well. Thinking about all the voice acting in the steel mill scene, which I think is probably the most cringy it can get, they always manage to turn it around on a joke that ends up being quite funny and a good observation. The steel mill thing feels a little too much. It's probably the only part I kind of object to. I like certain things when Homer's going through his journey to make Bart straight, where he makes him sit in front of those two girls having a pillow fight billboard ad for Virginia Slims, and he goes, "Oh, you want a cigarette?" And of course he wants anything slim, which is funny because what Homer wanted kind of backfired on him. Same with the drive to when they're going to hunt, and Bart says that a bunch of guys in the woods is kind of gay, and they're like, "You should be more mature." I liked a lot of that stuff. It's just the steel mill thing feels a little too much quasi-offensive now. I don't think you probably do that now, but they do always have their heart in the right place, and I think the portrayal of Homer is interesting because it's not the kind of buffoony Homer, but I like it because sometimes you run into people and you don't realize their prejudice after hanging out with them for years even, and you're kind of shocked by it and you're not sure how to handle it, and I think it puts you in an uncomfortable situation as a viewer with Homer, particularly if you object to his homophobia, and I really like how The Simpsons did that because it takes it head on. It's probably a more controversial episode than people realize. Fox at first didn't want to air it. Their censors said it was not fit for broadcast and give them 2 pages of notes. They usually never gave them that many notes, and then the censors and the head of the network were changed over and suddenly they could air it, thank God. That shows you how still in 1997 this was considered a controversial episode. I think in some ways it is because of what the journey they take you on with Homer as a character. That's not something you see any sitcom or any show do in their 8th season, kind of make you feel uncomfortable with one of the main characters. I think it's trying to make you understand that even though it's a conversation that for most people at the time was uncomfortable, it's a conversation that they're going to confront you with. And the fact that John is so like, this is my life, this is who I am, and everyone who's gay in this episode is very much like the steel mill worker who does go like, oh stop, shows how most of the gay characters in this are so used to being told that they're kind of past it and have kind of simply gone like, okay, don't be so silly and things like that. I like that portraying anyone who's homophobic as being just not enlightened. The whole idea of John Waters even saying like, oh, you don't get a cookie, oh you do, that's just cruel. Like, and the whole idea that anyone who is homophobic in the Homer's Phobia episode is kind of outdated and just doesn't simply understand what's going on, I think was a rather enlightened idea for 1997. Not having an episode where they're talking about how hard it is to be gay or something like that, just kind of an acceptance to it, which I think a lot of this episode really had its heart in the right place. I don't think it's that controversial now. There's probably a few things that if you saw it now you'd be like, I don't know if you do that portrayal now, but I think a lot of what it's doing is really smart and really enlightened, frankly. I always love this for John Waters. In fact, I have this Simpsons episode guide, which I've had for a long time. It only goes up to the 8th season, so that probably shows you how long I've had it, but also I have the page for the episode signed by John Waters, which is something I'm quite proud of. Just have it signed in the middle of the book there. I've always really liked this episode, and I've always really liked how enlightened it is, but I've also, to me, I liked how John Waters fits so well into this. The only real John Waters movie references in this is that when he first appears, there's the pink flamingo behind him, and when Bart does his little dance to the record, it's clearly a Hairspray reference, particularly the wig. To me, it was, at least. I didn't notice any other John Waters movie references, but it goes to like the cool thing about older Simpsons is that John Waters was cool. He certainly was on a bunch of talk shows. Pecker would come out after this episode, but he wasn't like the coolest thing in the world at the time. He was more of a fringe kind of celebrity. He's a cult movie maker, of course, and the fact that they would have him on The Simpsons in such a major episode, in such a major role, says a lot about The Simpsons. Now I think they would have a big celebrity guest star or something like that, and John Waters certainly wasn't that, but he brought a lot to the episode, and I think it shows one of the cooler things about The Simpsons is they used to have like Adam West and weirder guest stars, and that's something I feel like the show's really been missing. I don't really watch the show as much, so maybe they do now. Watching John Waters in this, I always thought was always really cool, and it showed how cool and like progressive The Simpsons could be even then. It was originally going to be an episode about camp, and then they were going to have an episode about Bart possibly being gay, and they combined them. But I think it works really well to have John Waters, the guy who talks about the difference between good bad taste and bad taste, to be this guy running a collector shop and talking about both camp and homosexuality in a way I don't think you'd ever see him talk about before, or before, since, but the way he did it in this episode, he doesn't really need to talk about it again because they did it so perfectly. A lot of how this episode works is John Waters' portrayal, because you get that he's smart, you get that he's funny, you get that he's interesting, but you also get that he's a normal person and should be treated as such, and making Homer's homophobia or Homer's phobia, all that more ridiculous and silly and frankly disgusting. This Simpsons episode was really ahead of its time, and I think now you'd be more accepting of that. Now we can have shows like Adventure Time, shows on Cartoon Network for kids that can tackle these kind of subjects. Of course, The Simpsons did it first and did it with an awesome cult movie maker, and I don't know a lot of shows that could both have an awesome guest star like John Waters and have a progressive episode that ended up being one of their most celebrated and best at the same time, and that shows both the magic of The Simpsons and the great things that John Waters can add to something. So if you have seen Homer's Phobia and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. If you would like to check out any of my other John Waters reviews, there's an annotation below that will take you to my John Waters review playlist. I will probably have another John Waters review soon. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Oh, also, I love that Hawaiian shirts joke. That Hawaiian shirts joke is ridiculous. I mean, Bart is kind of a big fat party animal, though, right?